My name is Vanessa. Hello, everybody. Um, I'm a professional storyteller and I live in Peckham, and I'm coming to you from my home in Peckham today. For the last few years, I've got together with Southwark Council and Southwark Libraries to organise an event for Southwark Festival of Words called Story Night, which is adult storytelling. And we've chosen six very different, eclectic, interesting storytellers to share their stories live. So when lockdown came and we realised we weren't going to be able to do it, we were pretty gutted, and we are incredibly grateful to Elaine Waters and Southwark Council for enabling this to go on online, which is brilliant. And the storytellers we have today, Vishali, Valentine, Rupesh, Kate, Deha, and Jamana, are absolutely brilliant. Each one coming from their own situation, each one with their own challenges for barriers to them creating a story for you, and they have all overcome those barriers so that they can bring you a story into your home tonight. And I've heard them all, and they really are pretty special, so you really are in for a treat. Now, in previous years, before every event, I've kind of introduced everybody, and I've also told a really little story myself. And that's what I'm going to do today. I'm just going to tell you a really small personal story. And this one has a lot of personal meaning for me. And I don't normally tell it very often when I'm outside my home for reasons that will become apparent in a minute. It happened about 200 years ago in London, in the north of London. So it's still a good story though. But yeah, it happened in the north of London. There was an orphanage, and there was a boy called Henry living there. And as he grew up in the poverty, seeing all the children around him, his friends, starving, having to eat gruel, survive on very little, not having sufficient clothes, having very poor prospects for their future, he felt sad. His heart went out to the poor. And although he was poor himself, it wasn't a selfish feeling. He wanted to help those around him more than he wanted help himself. And as a boy, he grew up. He never grew very tall. He was, by the time he was a grown man, he was just over 5 foot. And this is simply because he didn't really have very much to eat as a child. And he got a job sweeping the streets. And he used to sweep the area around Caledonian Market, around King's Cross, where they used to sell the apples, the Costa apples, and all the different fruit and vegetables. And the costermongers used to shout out their wares, because the point was to try and attract the attention of passers-by, so that the passers-by would shop with them and not with somebody else. And they used to compete over who could shout the loudest and who would have the funniest things that they would say, and who could dress the most flash. They called it flash. And the way that they liked to dress flash was they liked to have pearl buttons made from oyster shells on their cuffs. And these, because they were made from oyster shells, they had a sort of pearl side to them, and when the sun would shine on them, they would literally flash, and they would attract attention. Henry Croft used to sweep through the market cleaning it, and he would pick up any bits of fruit or whatever. But he would also pick up the pearl buttons. And they do say that a ship came into the Thames with a cargo of pearl buttons, and it broke up, so pearl buttons were strewn all over the foreshore of the Thames, and Henry got to hear about this, and he went down and he got thousands. That may or may not be true, but what I can tell you is most definitely true is that at some point he had enough pearl buttons in his collection to cover a suit completely with these buttons. And when he stepped out, this suit completely covered the trousers, the tie, the hat, the sleeves, the back, every single part of it covered, what was called smothered. It was extremely heavy. When he went out, he looked so incredible. As the sun shone on him, people thought he looked like an angel. And when they commented on how amazing he looked, he said, if you think that I look good, give me a farthing for the poor. Just give me a penny for the poor. And they did. And in his lifetime, Henry Croft, his name was, he collected what would be in today's money about £750,000 for the poor. He didn't keep any of it himself. He did not become rich at all from what he was doing. But other people saw what he was doing and they copied him, and they also raised money, not selfishly, but for others. And these became the pearly kings and queens. And after a while, they stopped smothering their suits, and they started to put designs on their suits. And the whole ethos of pearly kings and queens is that they don't collect money for themselves, and many of them die in poverty and obscurity. However, they consider that it's their job well done if they've managed to raise money for charities of people who really are in need. And the reason that I like to tell this story is because I've actually managed to get a pearly suit, which you can just see hanging in the corner there. I'll bring it and show you in a minute. And the reason I never tell it out is because the pearly suit is so heavy. You can't actually carry it in anything other than like a trolley or a wheelbarrow. And then it's really heavy, and it's really fragile as well. So all the bits quite often fall off. And I've spent many an hour feeling a bit like Henry Croft sewing on flipping pearl buttons. Anyway, I've got here the hat. This is the Pearly King of Bushy Heath's jacket. I'm not going to wear the hat. This really is heavy. And this has got a certificate of authenticity. It was previously owned by the actor Daniel Day-Lewis at one point. And you can see it's got lots of wonderful designs. If I bring it up close, you can probably see that everything is made of beautiful pearl buttons. There's bicycles, there are wheelbarrows. So barrows and donkeys are a very common design. And here there's an owl for Henry Croft's wisdom. And here there is a heart to show that Henry had such a heart for the poor. I'll put it on. So this is my story for story night, and I just think it's wonderful that someone should have such an amazing creative idea, and from nothing. He was so poor, he had nothing at all, but he changed so many people's lives, and he brought fun and colour as well. So that is the story of Henry Croft, and you can see a blue plaque to him, and there's also a statue of him. Meanwhile, now I would like to hand you over to our storytellers. So I hope you have an amazing evening listening to everybody, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Rupesh Robinson-Vyas, and I used to think that stories were just stories. Nonsense we made up because our world is boring and predictable. That changed after I went to Chile, and I picked up 3 new stories. The first is about a lonely forest creature who, more than anything, wanted to meet someone she could speak to, spend time with. Anyone would do, but that was difficult because hardly anyone came to her remote corner of the forest and she couldn't leave, and so her loneliness continued and it made her sad. And as time went on, that sadness continued to grow inside her. In fact, it built up so much that it filled up her entire chest and she could barely breathe. And then, just when she thought she could bear it no longer, she spotted a visitor. Instantly her heart rose and she let out all that sadness in one big breath and went running straight towards that visitor. What she didn't realise is that just as her sadness was blown out, it gathered itself together and took on this beautiful shimmering form. And this beautiful shimmering sadness began to rise gently upwards and began to flow gracefully through the trees, singing a soft, haunting song as it went by. The visitor on the ground couldn't help but notice it and was instantly mesmerised. He looked up and began to follow the softly singing spectacle as it gently made its way through the trees. And with that, he didn't have a chance to spot the poor, hopeful little forest creature right there on the ground in front of him, desperate for his attention. Instead, he walked off through the forest to wherever that haunting song would take him. And so, another visitor had been lured away by the beautiful spectre of her sadness, and she was left alone and felt a new sadness begin to build up in her chest. The second story is quite different. It's about a swamp creature who keeps all his tiny little children near him at all times so he can make sure they're always safe. In fact, he was so concerned with their safety that he never really made time to look after himself or even to find anything to eat, which meant that he would get hungrier and hungrier while his soft-bodied little children would continue playing all around him. And eventually he got so hungry that as one of his children waddled by, he couldn't help himself and swallowed the child whole. After being hungry for so long, that first mouthful just wasn't enough, and instead it triggered an urge to gorge and made him swallow more and more of his children until all of them were gone and he was finally full. And he sat there for a while, finally content. But then the stillness and the quietness left by the absence of his children started to make him feel quite upset. He began to miss their smiling little faces, the way they gurgled and cuddled and giggled and played all about him. Grief struck deep, deeper than the hunger ever did, and it made him feel sick. And he could no longer hold it. Eventually, he ended up throwing up violently, and all the round little bodies of his children came tumbling out. The full horror of what he'd done to his children lay out there exposed, right in front of him, and he couldn't bear it. In his madness, he began to scream. It was a scream so loud and so powerful that the soft round little bodies of his children began to twitch, and then they started to wriggle, and then they all got up and they started to gurgle and cuddle and roll around all about him again, as if nothing had ever happened. And he went back to guarding them and keeping them safe, and he was happy again. So happy, in fact, that for a while at least, he was able to forget how hungry he was getting. Okay, my third story is about how the Andes Mountains range actually got formed. And it begins at the start of time when there was a gigantic brown snake. And she was responsible for protecting the land and all its inhabitants. Meanwhile, in the seas, was a giant blue sea serpent who grew increasingly angry at how humans would constantly pillage and pollute his waters. One day, when he could no longer take the disrespect, he decided to get his revenge. And so he started thrashing and thrashing and thrashing, and that sent huge waves of water out to the land, set on drowning all its inhabitants. As soon as the big brown snake of the land realised what was happening, she gathered all the people and inhabitants onto her back and started to try and raise the mountains, therefore forming the Andes Mountains range. But the blue sea serpent wasn't done. Seeing what the snake was doing, he decided to thrash even harder, sending even more water out onto the land. And the giant brown snake could no longer raise the land, but desperately wanted to save all her people and all the animals. So she decided to jump into the sea and attack the sea serpent. With great strength, she was able to bite onto the tail of the sea serpent, and the sea serpent screamed. In retaliation, he bit the snake's tail, and together they were locked like that in battle. Over time, they began to get tired, but each refused to let go of the other, and so, no longer able to swim, they began to sink down to the bottom of the ocean, and neither was seen ever again. But we know they're still down there because the heat and friction of their constant deadlock struggle continues to send up eruptions and tremors on the land even today. Each of these three stories tells us something, whether it's that loneliness often causes greater loneliness, that parents face a constant struggle between meeting their children's needs and their own, or that we as humans are powerless against the forces of nature. But more than that, each of these stories is actually more true than it first seems. You see, because in the temperate rainforests of Chile, there's actually a bird called the chical. You'll actually hear its sad sounding song up above you in the trees everywhere you go, but you'll never see it. And that's because the chical is actually able to project its song up into the trees while staying right on the ground, possibly right by your feet, but you won't notice because you'll be too busy looking up into the trees trying to find out where that song's coming from. And that's why some people call the chical the ventriloquist bird of Chile. In those same forests there's also a frog. It's called Darwin's frog. It's a small pointy-nosed little frog about the same size as your fingernail, and Darwin's frogs take fatherhood very seriously. The mum, in fact, will actually abandon the eggs soon after they're laid, leaving dad in charge. And he'll watch over the eggs, and as soon as one wriggles, he'll swallow it. And he'll do that for all the eggs until they're all swallowed, but they're not in his stomach. He's actually holding them in his throat, and then he'll keep them safe until they're ready to hatch into tadpoles. And then, still, he'll actually even feed them with secretions from the lining of his throat. Eventually, they'll go from tadpoles to being little frogs, and at that point, he'll violently throw them all up and see all the little baby frogs hopping away, ready to lead their own lives. And he'll, having not eaten during this whole process, will finally get something to eat, and then probably start the whole process all over again. So that's the first two stories, but surely the idea of two gigantic reptiles locked in a earth-shattering battle can't possibly be real. Except that while it didn't happen exactly like it did in the story, it kind of did happen. You see, just on the other side of the Andes Mountains, they've found bones that show that long before the Andes Mountains were even formed, the land was stalked by an enormous two-legged carnivore, like the T-Rex but even bigger, and its name was Giganotosaurus. Alongside these monsters lived Argentinosaurus, and these were skyscraper-sized, long-necked dinosaurs that wandered the land in herds, and according to the fossil record, may occasionally have had to fight for their life against a pack of Giganotosauruses. So you see, I learned that stories aren't just stories. They're actually a great way for us to help understand ourselves and the world around us, because the other thing I learned is that the world is not boring or predictable, but actually full of more mystery and surprises than we could ever make up. Okay, thank you. I'm Rupesh, and I really hope you enjoyed listening to me. Thanks. Bye.
Hi, my name is Daqa Mohammed Abdi. I am a writer and a poet and a storyteller. I come from Somalia, and when I was little, I spent some years as a nomad. Up until I was 7, my early childhood was spent as a nomad. We had camels and goats and sheep, and we would move around in the plains of Somalia. And those are my best memories. And just to link this to the two stories I want to tell. I remember being told Al Shidad stories, and I was so fascinated, and I felt so happy. It was fascinating and exciting and hilarious, and it took me through all those emotions, and that's made a real impact on me. They've always stayed with me, and one of the things I love to revisit by asking elders is those stories. I would love to share with you two of those stories. I will start with one called, I will call it The Battle. So Al Shidad was a man who was known to be, he was well known for being basically a bit of a fool, and just really funny and really silly. And so one day, Al Shidad there was a battle coming up. The two tribes, his tribe was about to have a battle with a different tribe, and so his tribe leaders were going from house to house, informing all the men and telling them to get ready for the battle the next day. And when Regal knew that they were going to come, he asked his wife to wrap him up in a rug, essentially a rug, and tell the men that he died when she came. When they came, he said, "Tell them that I have died." And so the men came knocking on the door. Actually, it's a bit of a curtain. It's like a hut, and so they kind of moved the curtain to the side, and they said, "Where's Regal?" And at that point, Regal is next to his wife, rolled in a rug next to where she is, and she's sort of making a scene, beating her chest and crying, And so they said, "What's going on?" They asked her, "What is going on, and where is your husband, Regal? Are you okay?" They asked her, and she said, Allah ba'aye, Allah ba'aye, Allah hogaye, Allah ba'aye. That means woe to me, and she's beating her chest and pulling her clothes. And they said, "What's going on here?" And she said, "My husband Regal is dead. Wo dintai, he's dead. Regal wo dintai." And so they said, they said, "When did Regal die?" And he kind of, had a moment, and he shouted, "Shalo dintai de, shalo dintai de." That means, "Tell them I died yesterday. Tell them I died yesterday." And, they obviously, the rug was right there, rolled and he's inside it, and they could hear him. And so they just looked at each other, and they looked back at the wife, and they said, "He's already as good as dead, so tell him that we're going to leave him and let him be." And so that's the end of that one. That's how Al Shidad survived, managed not to go to the battle with the other tribe. And the second one, Al Shidad one day decided that he was going to climb a tree. He took an axe and he climbed a tree, and he sat on a really strong branch of the tree, and he started hacking and hitting, basically cutting the tree with the axe. And as he was doing that, he wanted to know what would happen if he climbed a tree and cut the tree. And so a man walked by, and the man stopped to look at him and said, "What are you doing, Regal? What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm just going to find out what's going to happen if I cut this tree that I'm on." And he said, "Why are you you shouldn't be cutting the tree." And Regal said, "Why?" And the man said, "Because if you cut this tree, you're going to fall." And Regal said, "What's going to happen if I fall?" And the man replied, "Well, what the man is that? You're going to die." And Regal said, "Oh, okay then." And he thought for a little bit, and the man left, and Regal thought for a little bit. but then decided to continue to cut the tree, hitting the tree with the axe, until the tree fell. And Igal was hurt a little bit, but he was fine. But he had this got, which is a shawl that men carry sort of around their neck, like a scarf, or over their shoulder, just something that men carry. And it has different uses. When they sit down, they put it on the ground, and they just sort of carry it with them, nomadic men. So he took his got, he lay on the ground. He thought to himself, for a moment, and he thought, you know what, the man said I would die. If I cut the tree, I would die, so I must be dead. So he decided that he was dead. He lay on the ground and covered himself with his got and just lay there. And then the next morning came, and somebody was walking past, looking for a specific village. And the person saw this person that was just sort of lying there, so he thought it must be somebody who's decided to just relax or something. And so he asked him, excuse me, where is so-and-so city? And Igal sat up and pointed to the north and said, well, yesterday when I was alive, the city was that way. And that's the end of the second Igal Shidad story. I hope you enjoy both of these stories as much as I did, and I still do. Thank you for listening. Hello again, and this is the last Igal Shidad story. It's also another very short one. One day Igal Shidad was having a rest after his lunch, having a little nap. In Somalia, people usually nap after lunch because in the afternoon the sun is really hot, so everybody normally sleeps for like an hour or two. So he was having his afternoon nap when a subhanyo is a small little harmless snake in Somalia. Subhanyo sort of passed over his nose, slithered over his nose and sort of passed and just got on with its life. As it was passing, he opened his eyes and froze. And when it did pass, he started to just cry and lament and cry and panic. And his wife said, what's the problem? And then he said, a subhanyo just went over my nose and left. And she said, why are you crying about this? It's just a little harmless snake. And he replied, well, it's made a path. It's made a path for all snakes now. Every afternoon when I sleep, over my nose is the new path for every snake of every kind. And that's what's going to happen. I can't have any more afternoon naps. I can't sleep anymore because I'm going to lie down, and this is the new path, he said, for it's opened basically a pathway. And yeah, that's how short that one is. I hope you enjoy all of these stories. I would love to have been face to face. It would have been wonderful, but there's always the next time. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Hi, my name is Vaishali, and I'm extremely delighted and also very, very grateful for this opportunity that I have to share a story with you today. The story that I have chosen is a story from the Indian mythology. And the reason I have chosen this story is because this story is very, very close to my heart. I've been listening to this story and celebrating it ever since my childhood. And the reason I love it is because this story celebrates the creator of this universe, the creator who is a very loving and a protective mother, a devoted lover, and a fierce warrior in the most difficult and challenging times. So I hope you like this story, and I hope you really enjoy it. Millions and millions and millions of years ago, when the universe didn't exist and when there was darkness, everywhere, she created the universe with a flash of her smile, and she filled it with light and energy. Her name was Kushmanda. Ku means little. Ush is warmth or energy, and Anda is an egg. So it is believed that she created this cosmic egg called the universe and filled it with light. And it is said that she is the one who gives direction and energy to the sun. After she created the universe and filled it with light and energy, she went on to create 3 supreme female goddesses. Their names were Mahalakshmi, Mahasaraswati, and Mahakali. Maha here signifies something very supreme or large, and that's why all the names start with Maha, because they were the supreme goddesses. After having created these 3 supreme goddesses, she went on to create 3 male gods and 3 female goddesses. Their names were Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, and the female goddesses were named Lakshmi, Saraswati, and Shakti. After which she offered Lakshmi to Vishnu, Saraswati to Brahma, and Shakti to Shiva as their consorts. And then she herself absorbed these 3 supreme female goddesses and entered Shakti. Shakti, which is the unending divine energy. After this, after creating the gods and goddesses, further they created more life and more living beings in the universe. And it is said that they all resided up there in the heavenly castle, which was their kingdom called the Kingdom of Gods. And there also was a kingdom of demons, or the asuras, or the bad guys. And the asuras or the demons always wanted to overpower the gods. And they were always looking to create havoc and destruction everywhere. Now, the king of demons was Rambha, and he fell in love with a beautiful princess, and her name was Mahishi. Mahishi, though was a beautiful princess, was cursed to be a water buffalo. And so when Rambha and Mahishi came together, from them was born Mahisasur, who was half human and half buffalo. When Mahisasur was ready and grew up to be the king, and when he became the king of the demons, he had a burning desire to rule the world. In those days, even the demons would undergo penance and do deep meditation or tapasya, and they would try to please the gods for some kind of boon or a blessing. And Mahisasur, since had a burning desire to rule the world, he went to do severe penance, and then he asked Lord Brahma for a boon or a blessing. So Lord Brahma asked him, "What is it that you want?" And he said, "Grant me this wish that never ever can a god, a demon, a man, or a beast kill me." Brahma, though, granted this boon or blessing to him, but warned him never to misuse this blessing. But you see, Mahisasur, After getting this boon or blessing, it went into his head. And he started, causing destruction, and there was so much of turbulence and, troubled times for everyone that the gods and the goddesses, after all, had to seek Shiva and Shakti's assistance. And then they all went and they pleaded and they requested Shiva and Shakti to do something about this, because Mahisasur was just trying to create so much havoc everywhere, and it was just not peaceful anymore. And everybody thought what to do, because after all, Mahisasur had a blessing or a boon that no man, beast, or a demon could kill him, not even a god. And then entered Shakti, the divine energy, the unending energy. She decided to step in and to go and face Mahisasur head on. All the gods gave her their magical weapons, but she decided to go alone to the battlefield. She had all kinds of arms, the trident, the spear, the sword. It was a fierce battle which went on for 9 long days and 9 nights. When she prepared to cut his head off, he changed his form into a mighty lion. When she hurled arrows at him, he turned into an elephant, and he used his long trunk to drag her down. When she recovered and she got up, and he quickly changed his form into a buffalo. This way he kept dodging her, and the battle went on and on. She recovered. She fought very, very bravely. She stood up every time she fell down. And fearless and courageous she was. And then, at the right opportunity that she got, she pinned the beast down using her spear and, pierced his neck. And when Mahisasur was trapped, he revealed his true form, half human and half buffalo. It was then that she pulled out her sword and she cut off and slayed his head. And this demon Mahisasur, who no god, demon, a beast or an animal could kill, met his end by Shakti, or none other than the divine energy, the incarnate energy. Her name was also Durga, and she is the warrior goddess. So this was the story about Durga, which I truly love. Thank you so much for listening.
My name's Valentine, and this is my short story called Feet in the Forest. There's a frost that falls upon the ground in the forest. It falls silently, but it's there. It's there for all to see. A child walks through this forest, and that child is me. Surrounded by trees, a cold breeze, a biting chill, but this child is warmed by the company of others, the company of loved ones. And this child walks through the forest with his mother, and his hand is clasped in his mother's hand tightly, as they go walking through the forest towards their destination of home. When night falls and the child sleeps, he finds himself once again in the forest. This dark forest, where he looks around and sees a figure standing ahead of him. This figure, partly lit by moonlight, approaches him. He gets closer and closer to the child. The child tries to speak, but no words come out. And this figure's hand raises up into the air, And in that hand is a sharp instrument. And that sharp instrument comes down onto the child's neck. And there the child screams. And these screams bring the child back to his home, back to his bed, where he's comforted by his mother as the child weeps and wails. A Friday afternoon brings joy to this child. The sound of the bell, and he springs forward towards home. He goes with the promise of ice cream, chocolates, adventure, the company of friends and loved ones, music, and comfort. Comfort from family members he hasn't seen for a long time. And these family members see a glimpse of this child's personality, his energy, his ambition, his dreams. And this child loves this time. A weekend is an adventure for this child, as it is for many children. And this child is at peace. This child gets older. And when this child gets older, emotions come to the fore. He has different feelings, emotions, difficult emotions, strange emotions. He learns about compassion, confusion. He learns of a love unreturned. And this child, older than he was before, begins to experience things. And he learns things. And these things make an impact on the child. But this child, he learns how to love. As time goes on, this child becomes a man. And this man has experienced loves, pains, friendships, books read, places travelled to, and this child, that is now a man, experiences love. One love. Between two. And these two go on an adventure, or at least the promise of adventure. And these two, with their love for one another, are comforted by each other. And these two become a three. A crowd of three is a crowd that they longed for. And the three of them go walking in the forest. The reason why I chose this story is a story that I wrote, and it's based on my life, but it's also been inspired by a story by Jamaica Kincaid called Blackness. And I read this story, and it was a story that talked about class and race and about ambition and dreams and children and childhood. And I wanted to write something about that and something that's connected with me. So I hope you liked it. And thank you very much for listening.
I was sitting on my balcony one day in the sunshine, and this story came into my head. I suddenly thought, we're in lockdown. I didn't get round to getting my hair cut beforehand. And so it's been growing and growing. I also wanted a friend to get me an item of shopping. I wanted to show her what I needed. Would I be able to lower this product over the balcony? But I realised she even couldn't get to it because the yard was shut under the balcony. We were truly in lockdown. And also, I was thinking about, as a blind person, the strangeness of life in lockdown, the things you can and can't do. I thought, I've never wanted to tell this story before, but now it just all seems to be completely relevant. You will know this story. Once, long ago, there lived a couple. They lived in a simple house, and they were very happy together, except there was one thing which they wanted terribly, and that was to have a child. In the back of the house there was a window, and the woman used to look out of the window onto a lovely garden, all sorts of spring flowers, lilacs, wallflowers, and all kinds of things in all the seasons. There were herbs too, and vegetables. Now, this garden nobody had access to. It had walls all round it. But one day there was a particular flower bed in which they grew a kind of herb. One name for it is rampion, but it's also called Rapunzel. And Rapunzel has leaves like lettuces and roots like radishes. Now this woman, her eye kept being drawn to this green lush herb, and she kept saying to her husband, "I want to eat some Rapunzel." And he said to her, "Well, we can't get into the garden, so just try this wonderful food that was delivered to our door yesterday." But she wouldn't eat it. Well, one evening, as dusk was drawing in, the man just decided to go and climb over the wall and get his wife some Rapunzel, just as a special treat. He managed to do this, grabbing a handful of Rapunzel and getting over that wall again as quickly as he could. And he gave it to his wife, and she made herself a salad of Rapunzel, and she found it so delicious. The next day it was all she would talk about. She seemed to want it more and more and more. So her husband, again that evening, he crept over the wall and tried to get to Rapunzel, but the witch who owned the garden, she was there waiting for him. "So you've sneaked into my garden," she said, "and taken my Rapunzel. Well," she said, "you will be punished sore for this." But he said, "It was my wife who wanted it. She wanted it so desperately. She looks at it all day. What can I do?" Well, the witch's heart softened, and she said, "Okay," she said, "you can take as much Rapunzel as you like. But just remember this. When your wife bears a daughter in a few months' time, I will take the daughter from you, and I will bring her up. She'll be well treated," said the witch. "Don't you worry about that." "Okay then," said the man. He didn't think of the implications of agreeing to this deal, and took armfuls of Rapunzel and took them to his wife. "Oh, this is wonderful," she said. "Oh, thank you, husband." He said, "The only thing is, I took it at a cost." She said, "How do you mean?" He said, "Well, the witch was there last night, the witch who owns the garden, and she said, if I take as much Rapunzel as I like, she will come and take our daughter when she's born." "Our daughter?" said his wife. "I didn't realize. Perhaps it's a craving. I'm pregnant after all." He said, "Yes, but you won't be able to see your daughter. The agreement was that the witch will bring her up." "Oh, husband, dear me." And she still ate the Rapunzel and really enjoyed it. And they hoped that maybe the witch would forget about this deal, but no, on the day that the woman was to give birth, she appeared. And when the child was born, a beautiful little girl, the witch took her off And of course the couple were so sad. But the witch gave the little baby and the young child and the growing girl a very happy childhood. She could play wherever she liked, and the witch taught her songs and games, and she was really happy. And the girl grew, and the witch called her Rapunzel, after the herb. And the girl grew, and her hair grew, and eventually, at the age of 12, the witch said to her, "Your life is going to have a little change." Oh, thought the girl, what's going to happen? And the witch said, "We're going to go to a faraway country, and I'm going to take you somewhere that you've never been before." And indeed the witch took Rapunzel. And by this time, Rapunzel's beautiful yellow golden hair had grown and grown. It was probably the longest hair you'd ever know anybody to have. And she took her to a tower, a round tower, a tall tower, with no stairs and no doors. And the witch took her to the uppermost room in the tower, where there was one window that the girl could look out of. And she said, "Here you will stay, my dear." And the girl was really disappointed. Anybody would be, but particularly Rapunzel. She loved playing outside and enjoying nature. So the witch said, "I will come and visit you once a day, Rapunzel. And what you have to do, you have to listen out for my call. I will say, 'Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your long hair.' And you will have to put your plaits out of the window, hook them to the window hook, and let them hang down the side of the tower, and I will climb up them. And then I will give you all you need, spend little time with you, and then go away again, and I'll come back the next day. You just listen for the call. And in the meantime, you can sing, you can play all the games I've taught you on your own. You can skip, you can do your daily exercise. Don't you worry, dear. Time will pass. And, oh, of course, I'll bring you things, and you can learn, just like all the other children have to do in lockdown." And so each day, Rapunzel would spend a day singing, often weeping. But it's true, in the afternoon she would hear the familiar voice, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your long hair." And the witch, surprisingly nimbly, would climb up Rapunzel's plaits to the window, and bring her a bit of food, and sort out any dirty washing or anything that Rapunzel needed her to do. And after about an hour or so, she would go away and leave Rapunzel to lead a lonely life. Now, this tower was in the middle of a wood, a deep forest, in fact. And the prince was on a journey. And as he rode along, he noticed a tower. It was a tall tower, it was a round tower. And when he stopped, he was listening, partly because he was interested in all the birds' song and all the nature, but partly he could hear some singing, some beautiful singing. "I'll give my love an apple without e'er a call. I will give my love a house without e'er a door." And he wondered what this faint, beautiful singing was. It seemed to be coming from the top of the tower. But how come? How could you get in? Well, he decided to go back there. And he went back often, attracted by the singing. And one day, one afternoon, he was standing behind a tree when he heard footsteps coming from the other direction. He stood stock still, and he just turned his head enough to see what was going on. And then he heard the call, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your gold hair." And he saw two beautiful, long, golden plaits being flung out of the window, and a witch climbing nimbly up to the top of the tower and in through the window. My goodness, he thought, what's going on? And he waited and waited, and about an hour later, down came the witch, as nimble as could be, and off she stomped into the undergrowth. And he thought, well, now I know what she does. Maybe if I tried the same thing, in my best witchy voice, I, the prince, could climb up the hair and see what's inside the tower, or who's inside the tower. So he waited until evening, and then he crept over and stood below the window, and in his best witchy voice he called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your gold hair." And so down came the plaits. He was really surprised, and nervously, and more nimbly than the witch, he climbed up to the top of the tower, in through the window. "Hello," he said. Oh, Rapunzel was terrified. She'd never seen anybody quite like the prince before. "Who are you?" she said. I thought it was my foster mother. I thought, I don't know who I thought it was, but I'd have never let down my plaits if I'd known it was somebody completely different, like you, least of all a man." He said, "Is that your name, Rapunzel?" She said, "Yes, yes." He said, "I'm the prince. I was passing by and I heard you singing." "Oh, Rapunzel," he said, "I've never seen someone so beautiful as you." And as she went on looking at him in the fading light, she said, "Well, maybe that's the same. Maybe I feel the same about you." And she looked at him again. He said, "Rapunzel, will you marry me?" She said, "Oh, Prince, yes, of course." And she placed her hand in his, and they looked into each other's eyes. He said, "I can't stay. It's not fair on you. You're trapped in here. I don't know what we should do." She said, "Tell you what, if you come and visit me often, then you could bring me a length of silk each time. And that means I could weave a ladder, a silken ladder, and I'd be able to climb out of the tower. When I've done that," he said, "what a good idea." She said, "Don't come in the daytime. In the afternoons, that's when the witch comes. Come at about this time each evening." And so the days passed. Things felt a lot better now, because although the witch came every afternoon, the prince came every evening with his length of silk. The trouble was, after a while, and Rapunzel didn't know what got into her, but when the witch arrived one day, she was saying, "Oh, of course, you're much heavier than the prince when he comes to see me." "The prince?" said the witch. "What? I thought that you were here imprisoned by me to not let anybody in, to not let anybody else at all into your tower. And here you are, being visited by a prince. I am shocked, Rapunzel, at your behaviour. This is terrible." And with that she grabbed Rapunzel's hair and she cut it off with some scissors, snip, snap, and she banished Rapunzel to the desert. And of course the witch, she went and waited in the tower. And that evening she heard a voice. "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your gold hair." She was very excited. A princely voice it indeed was. And so she took the plaits, she hooked them to the window, and she let them hang down the side of the tower. And within no time the prince had climbed up the tower and into the window. Well, he was horrified. "Ha ha 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 ha," said the witch. "I've trapped you, prince. I've heard about you, and now your trick has been discovered." "But where's Rapunzel?" he said. "Ah," she said, "the bird has stopped singing on the nest, she has flown, and the cat will scratch out your eyes." "Oh no," said the prince, and with that he leapt out of the window, but he landed in a thorn bush, and he got completely covered in scratches from the thorns, including in his eyes, and he was blinded by the thorns. It was difficult for him to get out of that thorn bush, and it was difficult for him for the next long time when he was rambling through the forest and he had to scavenge for himself. He didn't know what food to eat or anything, but managed to survive on berries and leaves and roots, and sometimes he thought he must have eaten some Rapunzel because it tasted so good, and it revived him a bit and filled him with a bit of hope. And he couldn't think where to travel to, and there was nobody to help him, and he felt terrified, having lost his sight so horribly, and he just blundered about for days and weeks, and he became emaciated, and he didn't think he'd survive. And then one day he felt completely lost. He seemed to have got in an area that was dry and sandy, and there seemed to be no food. And she may unlock it without any key. There was a familiar voice. That sad, familiar voice, and he found himself finding his way towards it. And as he drew nearer, the voice came louder, and he could hear running footsteps towards him. And there was Rapunzel. They fell into each other's arms and embraced, both weeping. And Rapunzel's tears fell on his eyes. And as in all fairy tales, he was healed. And this was quite useful in the circumstances, because he led her to his kingdom. And there they arranged a wedding. They invited Rapunzel's parents, and she saw them for the first time, and so did he. And the whole family lived happily for a long time, all together in the prince's kingdom.
Hi, my name is Jemana, and I was really pleased to be involved in the Southwark Festival of Words last year to contribute some storytelling, and I was really glad to be asked again this year, and sad that now that we're in lockdown we can't all be together to have that evening. So I have the story that I'd like to send you via video, and well, I hope you enjoy it. Once upon a time, there lived an old sheikh, a master, a great teacher, and over the course of his life, he taught a great many students. But he had 3 students who'd stayed with him the longest, who'd been the most dedicated, and who he loved the best. And when the old sheikh finally died, he wrote a will. And in his will, he asked that his entire estate should be divided amongst these 3 students. He also left very particular criteria for how this should be done. So when the 3 students sat with the qadi, with the judge, who opened up the will in front of them, he went through it and he said to them, listen, your master requested that you, he said to the first student, who studied with him the longest, should receive a half of his estate. And to you, he said to the second student, who was with him for a long time, but not as long as the first, you should have a third. And to his youngest student, who was with him but a very short amount of time, but was very much loved, he wants to leave a 1/9 of his estate. Very well, said the students, we will divide it as he wishes. Well, said the judge, the thing is, your master left you a herd of 17 camels to be divided as requested. Oh, said the students, what? 17 divided by 2, and 17 divided by 3, and 17 divided by 9? No, they couldn't do it. They said to the qadi, what should we do? And the qadi said, that is down to you to find the solution. Well, the students went off and they sat for nights poring over how to try and solve the problem, but they could not. And they decided they would consult with another teacher, another wise man. And they found one who lived on the other side of the town from where they lived, and they went to see him and they explained to him the problem, and they said, please, can you help us? And the man said, it is not hard. He said, really, you must just go and slaughter the camels and divide the meat amongst you as requested by your master. No, no, said the students. Our master was very fond of those camels. He had named every single one of them, and I don't think it would be in the spirit of his work and his life to slaughter them. No, that is not a solution for us. Very well, said the teacher, sent them on their way. Well, the time passed and the students still had no solution, and they began to look a little further afield in the towns around their own for someone to help them. And in time, they heard of a teacher living in the neighbouring town, and they went to see him. They explained the problem to him, and he said to them, I don't know what your teacher taught you all these years, really. The answer is very straightforward. He said, sell all of the camels, gather the money, and distribute it as he has asked. What is so hard about that? The student said, we just don't think that our teacher would want us to break up the herd. I think he'd want us to keep the herd together, not to disseminate his legacy. No, thank you, but this is not a solution for us. Very well, said the teacher. And he returned to his writing. Well, now the students went off again, and it was a long time until they heard about another teacher living a village a little way out of their town. And they went to see him, and they sat down and they told him their problem, and he looked at them and said, "It seems to me that you are very foolish students of knowledge. What you must do is rent out your camels, pool the money every month, and divide the money amongst you as requested by your teacher." But, said the students, our master was very particular about how we cared for the camels. When we came back from a long journey, for example, we must feed them and water them first before ourselves. Make sure they had enough straw and that it was clean, perhaps a little blanket if the night was cool. Clean water, that they were safe. No. How could we be sure that our camels would be well cared for if we rented them out? What if we rented them to someone who beat them? Our master would find this completely unacceptable. No. Thank you, but this is not a solution for us. The teacher shrugged. Well, he said, I cannot help you. And he sent them on their way and returned to his books. Well, now the students, thoroughly demoralized, depressed, went and sat in the tea house. What should we do? They said. We have no way to solve our problem and meet our master's wishes. And as they sat there over their small glasses of tea, a man came past, looked at them, and he said, aren't you those students looking to solve your master's wishes about his inheritance? They said, we are. And he said to them, how have you got on? And they said, we have not solved our problem. And he said to them, then you need to go to Sheikha Halima. You have been looking in all the wrong places. There is a wise woman, Sheikha Halima. She lives far out in the desert, 3 days' journey from here. Go to her, and she will help you. Well, the students, they'd never heard of Sheikha Halima. They'd never travelled 3 days out deep into the heart of the desert. That was further than they had ever been before, but what choice did they have? They had to solve their master's question. And so they set off. They readied themselves, they readied the camels, they got food, they got water. And off they went. They travelled by day and by night, resting in the hottest part of the day. The journey was hard and the journey was hot, dirty and dusty. They travelled over the savannah, over the thorny scrubland, and they travelled over great sand dunes. The stars at night glittered above them like jewels on black velvet. They weathered the wind and the heat as they travelled further and further into the desert, until at last, after 3 days, they saw ahead of them. What was that? The black goat hair tents shimmering in the intense heat of the desert. Was it real? Was it a mirage? They moved closer, and they saw that it was, in fact, the black goat hair tents of a Bedouin camp. And as they came closer, a rider came out to meet them. Called out to them, "Who are you?" And they said, "We are here to see Halima." And the rider said, "In that case, you have arrived at the right place. Halima is my mistress, and come, You are welcome. So they were brought into the camp and they were given water to wash and water to wash their faces and to drink. And when they were rested, they were granted their audience with Sheikh Halima. They sat down in front of her and they told her all their difficulties. She looked at them for a while, silently, and then she said, listen, I can help you. You have always looked to take before you give. You have always looked to decrease before you expand. She said, I will make you a gift. I too am a camel herder. And I will gift you 1 camel. You now have 18 camels. So you, she said to the first student, can have your half. Half of 18 is 9. And you, she said to the second student, can have your third. A third of 18 is 6. And you, she said to the youngest, can have your 9th. A 9th of 18 is 2. 9 and 6 is 15 and 2 is 17. Your 17 camels are equally divided amongst you, and the last remaining camel I will take back as my fee. The students looked at each other baffled. They said, how did she do it? But she had. They thanked her, and as they stood up to leave, they realised something else, that their master had slipped into his wishes around his legacy. They said, Halima, would you consider accepting us as your students and allowing us to stay here with you and learn? And Halima, who'd seen the Sheikh's idea to help them find their new teacher tucked inside his legacy all along, she said, of course, stay. And so they did. And Sheikh Halima, the wise woman, taught them all the secrets of the 18th camel. She taught them all the secrets of generosity and expansion before taking and decreasing. And she taught them many other things as well. And when they were ready, after many years of studying with her, they went out into the desert to teach the story of the 18th